A horse gives birth to multiple foals, and what begins as a joyous moment quickly takes a dramatic turn. The vet's reaction to the third foal leaves everyone stunned and speechless. What could be so shocking about this fragile newborn? And how will it change the lives of everyone on the farm? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun peeked through the weathered slats of the barn, painting golden stripes across the hay-strewn floor. Emma Jones moved with practiced ease through her morning routine, the familiar sense of fresh hay and leather tack filling her nose. She paused at Luna's stall, her favorite mare's unusual behavior catching her attention. "Daniel," she called out, her voice tight with worry. "Can you come here for a minute?" Her husband's boots scraped against the concrete as he approached, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. "What's wrong?" Luna paced back and forth in her stall, her chocolate-brown coat slick with sweat. Her tail swished frantically, and her breathing came in short, sharp bursts. "Something's not right," Emma said, reaching for the stall door. "She's acting like—" Her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "Daniel, I think she's going into labor." "That can't be right." Daniel pulled out his phone, checking the calendar. "She's not due for another 2 weeks." Emma slipped into the stall, running her hands along Luna's swollen sides. The mare nickered softly, but continued her restless movement. "Early or not, this baby's coming." They sprang into action, falling into a rhythm born from years of working together. Daniel grabbed fresh straw while Emma gathered clean towels from the supply room. Her hands trembled as she dialed Dr. Miller's number. "The contractions are just starting," Emma explained into the phone, watching Luna anxiously. "How soon can you get here?" Dr. Miller's calm voice carried through the speaker. "I'm about an hour out, finishing up with an emergency call. Keep her comfortable and watch her breathing patterns. Call me immediately if anything changes." After hanging up, Emma helped Daniel prepare the birthing area. They worked in tense silence, spreading fresh straw and setting up bright work lights. Luna's whinnies grew more distressed as the afternoon sun began to fade. "Should we have seen this coming?" Emma whispered, more to herself than to Daniel. "Maybe I missed some signs." Daniel squeezed her shoulder. "You're the most attentive horse owner I know. Sometimes these things just happen." As evening settled over the farm, Luna's labor intensified. Her painful cries echoed through the barn, each one making Emma's heart clench. Daniel held up a lantern, its warm light casting long shadows across the stall walls. "That's it, girl," Emma murmured, stroking Luna's neck. "You're doing so well." She glanced at her watch for the 100th time, willing Dr. Miller to arrive soon. Luna dropped to her knees, her sides heaving with effort. Emma's stomach knotted with worry as she realized they might have to handle this delivery on their own. Daniel moved closer, his presence steady and reassuring, despite the concern etched on his face. "Remember when that goat kid was britched last spring?" he said softly. "We handled that just fine." Emma nodded, but her voice shook slightly as she replied, "This is different, Daniel. This is Luna." The mare let out another strained whinny, and Emma pressed her forehead against Luna's neck, whispering words of comfort, while silently praying for Dr. Miller to arrive in time. The setting sun painted the barn in deep amber hues as Luna's contractions grew stronger. Emma knelt beside the mare, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Daniel moved quietly around them, adjusting the lantern to cast better light on their work. "Easy there, sweet girl," Emma murmured, running her hand along Luna's neck. The mare's muscles quivered beneath her touch, and sweat darkened her coat to a deep chocolate brown. Daniel crouched next to his wife, their shoulders touching. Her breathing's getting stronger, he observed, his voice barely above a whisper. The barn fell into a rhythm of quiet anticipation, broken only by Luna's labored breaths and the occasional shuffle of hooves against straw. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus, a gentle backdrop to the drama unfolding within. Suddenly, Luna shifted position, and Emma caught sight of tiny hooves emerging. "There we go," she encouraged, her voice trembling with emotion. "That's it, Luna." With a final push, the first foal slipped into the world. Emma's hands moved quickly, clearing its airways and rubbing it dry with clean towels. The chestnut colt's coat gleamed in the lantern light, and a striking white blaze marked his face. "He's perfect," Daniel breathed, helping Emma clean the newborn. The colt struggled to his feet, wobbling on spindly legs while Luna nickered softly. Before they could fully celebrate, Luna's sides contracted again. Within minutes, a second foal arrived, a delicate filly with distinctive speckled markings across her coat. She was smaller than her brother, but just as determined, pushing herself up on shaky legs almost immediately. Emma watched with joy as both foals found their way to Luna, nursing vigorously. "Look at them go," she said, relief evident in her voice. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they shared a moment of pure happiness, the earlier worry melting away. But their relief was short-lived. Luna's sides began to heave again, her muscles visibly contracting beneath her sweat-soaked coat. Emma's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "There's another one," she said, concern creeping back into her voice. She and Daniel exchanged worried glances as they moved back into position, ready to help with this unexpected third delivery. Luna's breathing grew more labored, and the peaceful moment from just minutes before evaporated into renewed tension. The mare shifted uncomfortably, her earlier exhaustion evident as she prepared to deliver one more time. The barn fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by Luna's labored breathing and the occasional rustle of hay beneath her. The air was thick with anticipation and the musty scent of straw. Emma remained steadfast at the mare's side, her hands steady despite the tremors of exhaustion running through her body. The lantern in Daniel's grip cast dancing shadows across Luna's sweat-soaked flanks, creating an otherworldly atmosphere in the dimly lit space. "Come on, girl," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of gentle encouragement. Her fingers worked small, soothing circles on Luna's neck. Luna's sides heaved with another contraction, and she let out a strained whinny that echoed through the rafters, sending dust motes swirling in the lantern light. Daniel shifted the lantern, illuminating the scene better. Worry lines creased his forehead as he watched his wife work. "Should we try to help her?" he asked, concern etching deep lines around his eyes. Before Emma could answer, Luna gave a mighty push. The third foal began to emerge, but something was different this time. Emma's heart squeezed as she noticed how tiny the legs appeared compared to its siblings. Her stomach knotted with worry. "Daniel, more light," she called softly, working quickly as the foal slipped into the world. Its coat was a pale, delicate gray, like morning mist, but unlike its robust siblings, this one barely moved. Emma's hands trembled as she wrapped the fragile creature in a clean towel, her movements gentle but urgent as she worked to stimulate its breathing. The foal felt impossibly light in her arms. The sound of tires on gravel announced Dr. Miller's arrival. The crunch of stones, a welcome interruption to the tense silence. The veterinarian hurried into the barn, medical bag in hand, her experienced eyes taking in the scene immediately. Her boots left clear prints in the scattered hay as she knelt beside Emma, examining the tiny foal with careful hands. "How long since the birth?" Dr. Miller asked, her brow furrowing as she listened to the foal's heart with her stethoscope. Just minutes, Daniel answered, moving closer to watch, his work-worn hands gripping the lantern tighter. Dr. Miller's examination was thorough but quick. This little one's significantly premature, she explained, her voice gentle but serious. The wrinkles around her eyes deepened with concern. The next few days will be critical. You'll need to monitor her around the clock. Emma nodded, already mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. Her mind raced with everything they would need to do. While Dr. Miller checked on Luna and the other foals, Emma and Daniel worked together to create a makeshift sleeping area in the barn. They dragged in an old cot, its metal frame squeaking against the wooden floor as they positioned it where they could easily watch over their smallest charge. The night settled around them as they sat together on the cot, their shoulders touching. The barn's familiar creaks and settling sounds provided a gentle backdrop to their vigil. Both showed the wear of the long day on their faces, but determination burned in their eyes. Emma reached out to stroke the tiny foal's head, her touch feather-light against the downy fur. "We'll name her Willow," Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She leaned slightly against Daniel's solid presence. "She's going to need all the strength we can give her." The early morning sunlight crept through the weathered barn walls, creating thin golden beams that illuminated dancing dust motes. Luna stood patiently in her stall, while her two stronger foals nursed vigorously, their tails swishing with contentment. But in the corner, little Willow lay still, her silver coat barely rising with each shallow breath. Emma's heart clenched at the sight. She approached the tiny foal with gentle steps, her boots crunching softly in the straw. With tender hands, she lifted Willow's frail body, cradling her close to her chest. The foal felt lighter than she should, like a delicate bird rather than a newborn horse. "Let's get you warm, little one," Emma murmured, carrying Willow to the makeshift warming pen they'd constructed in the night. Daniel had rigged up a heat lamp, its red glow casting a warm circle on the soft blankets below. Emma placed Willow carefully in the cozy nest, adjusting the blankets around her tiny form. Dr. Miller's truck rumbled up the driveway mid-morning, bringing with her a box of supplies and a determined expression. She examined Willow thoroughly, her experienced hands moving with practiced care. "She needs supplemental feeding," Dr. Miller explained, demonstrating how to prepare the milk replacer. "Every 2 hours around the clock. It's going to be exhausting, but it's her best chance." She showed them how to hold the bottle at the right angle, how to encourage Willow to suckle. The day stretched into a blur of feeding schedules and constant monitoring. Emma and Daniel worked in shifts, one tending to Luna and the other foals, while the other sat with Willow. The stronger foals pranced around their mother on spindly legs, growing steadier by the hour. But Willow remained still, accepting the bottle with minimal effort. During the afternoon feeding, Daniel watched Emma coax Willow to drink, his face etched with worry. "Emma," he said softly, "are we doing the right thing? Making her fight so hard?" Emma looked up at her husband, dark circles under her eyes, but determination burning bright in her gaze. "She deserves a chance, Daniel. As long as she's breathing, she's fighting." The evening brought a cool breeze through the barn doors. Emma and Daniel sat side by side on hay bales near Willow's pen, sharing a thermos of coffee. The lamp cast its warm glow over them all, and in that quiet moment, Willow stirred. Her delicate head lifted slightly, just for a moment, before settling back down. Emma grabbed Daniel's hand, squeezing it tight. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "She's fighting." Daniel squeezed back, his calloused hand warm around hers. They watched their tiny foal together, their hearts full of equal measures of fear and hope. The barn's weathered walls creaked softly in the pre-dawn breeze. A single lantern cast long shadows across the straw-covered floor as Emma sat cross-legged beside Willow's warming pen. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion while she held the bottle steady, watching the tiny foal take slow, weak sips from the rubber nipple. The first rays of morning light hadn't yet touched the horizon, but the birds had already begun their daily chorus outside. Emma blinked heavily, fighting to stay awake. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her look up as Daniel entered, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in his hands. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, matching her own. "Thought you could use this," he said softly, handing her one of the mugs. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers as she accepted it gratefully. They worked out a schedule over their coffee, dividing the day into shifts. "I'll take the morning feeds if you'll handle the afternoon," Daniel offered, pulling out a worn notebook to write down their plan. "We can alternate nights." Emma nodded, grateful for his practical approach. They set up a small cot in the corner of the barn, complete with pillows and blankets. The old sleeping bag they found in the attic wasn't comfortable, but it would do. As the day progressed, they settled into their new routine. Emma watched from Willow's pen as Daniel took his turn with the afternoon feeding. Through the barn door, she could see Luna in the pasture, watching over her other 2 foals. The chestnut colt and speckled filly kicked up their heels in the spring sunshine, their legs growing stronger with each passing hour. The sight made Willow's weakness even more apparent. While her siblings galloped and played, she lay quietly in her pen, barely moving except to nurse from the bottle. Her silver coat, still baby-soft, seemed too big for her frail frame. That night, as Emma prepared for another feeding, something felt different. The barn was quiet except for the gentle humming of the heat lamp. When she knelt beside Willow, she noticed the foal's breathing had become shallower, each breath a visible struggle. "Daniel," she called out, panic rising in her throat. "Something's wrong." The sound of running footsteps preceded Daniel's arrival. He quickly adjusted the heat lamp, moving it closer while Emma cradled Willow's tiny body against her chest. "She's not giving up," Emma said through tears, holding the foal close. "And neither will we." Daniel wrapped his arms around both of them, his presence steady and strong. Together, they sat in the warm circle of lamplight, watching over their fragile charge as the night grew deeper. Sunlight streamed through the barn windows, casting warm patches across the straw-covered floor. Dr. Miller's truck crunched on the gravel driveway, the familiar sound echoing across the morning stillness. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, her well-worn medical bag clutched firmly in her hand, her boots leaving dusty prints on the wooden planks. Luna's soft whinny greeted the vet, her ears pricking forward with interest, while the other horses shifted curiously in their stalls. In her warming pen, Willow lay curled into a tiny ball, her silver coat rising and falling with each shallow breath, looking even smaller than she had the day before. "Let's see how our little fighter's doing," Dr. Miller said, kneeling beside the pen. Her experienced hands moved gently over Willow's fragile body, checking vital signs and looking for any signs of improvement. The foal barely stirred under her touch, too weak to protest the examination. Emma and Daniel stood close by, their faces etched with worry, shoulders tense with anticipation. They exchanged nervous glances as Dr. Miller's expression remained neutral during her examination, but her eyes held concern that she couldn't quite mask. "She's hanging on, but just barely," she finally said, reaching into her bag with practiced efficiency. She pulled out several bottles of supplements, carefully explaining how to mix them with the milk replacer, demonstrating the proper measurements with her hands. "These will help boost her strength, but we need to watch her carefully. Her temperature and hydration levels are crucial right now." The vet's voice grew more serious as she continued. her words carrying the weight of years of experience. "Her immune system is very weak. We'll need to keep the pen extremely clean to prevent any infections. Even a minor illness could be dangerous for her right now. The next 48 hours will be critical." Despite the gravity of her words, Dr. Miller offered a reassuring smile as she packed up her supplies, each item finding its familiar place in her bag. "It's clear she has the will to survive. You just have to keep supporting her. I've seen miracles happen before." After the vet left, Emma and Daniel spent the day following her instructions meticulously. They cleaned Willow's pen until it sparkled, mixed her new formula with careful precision, and monitored her temperature regularly, marking each reading in a notebook. As evening settled over the farm, bringing with it a chorus of cricket songs, they sat together on bales of hay near Willow's pen, the weight of their situation heavy between them. "Emma," Daniel said quietly, running a hand through his hair, his weathered face showing the strain of worry, "I need to talk to you about something." He pulled out a stack of bills from his pocket, spreading them on his knee like a fan of bad news. "The supplements, the special formula, the vet visits. It's all adding up fast. We're looking at hundreds of dollars a week." Emma's hand never stopped stroking Willow's coat as she listened, her fingers finding comfort in the foal's silky fur. Her voice was firm when she responded, carrying the quiet determination that Daniel knew so well. "If we stop now, she won't have a chance. We have to keep trying." Daniel looked at his wife, then at the tiny foal, taking in the scene before him. After a moment, he nodded, tucking the bills back into his pocket with a soft sigh. His silence spoke of his resolution to continue, despite his concerns, his love for Emma, and their shared commitment to Willow outweighing the financial burden. A crisp morning breeze rustled through the trees as Emma pulled open the heavy barn door. Sunlight flooded the space, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden rays. The familiar scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils, bringing comfort with its familiarity. Outside in the pasture, Luna's two stronger foals kicked up their heels, their chocolate and speckled coats gleaming as they frolicked around their mother. Their joyful whinnies carried across the farm, a celebration of life and strength, echoing off the weathered barn walls. Emma's attention shifted to the warming pen, where a subtle movement caught her eye. Willow, her tiny gray form usually so still, was stirring. The foal's delicate head wobbled as she attempted to push herself up, her spindly legs trembling with effort. The sight made Emma's heart race with anticipation. "Daniel," Emma called out, her voice barely above a whisper, not wanting to startle Willow. "Come quick." Her fingers gripped the wooden railing of the pen, knuckles white with tension. Daniel hurried over from where he'd been fixing a loose board, his tool belt jingling softly as he moved. Together, they watched in amazement as Willow struggled against gravity. Her first attempt ended in a gentle flop back onto the soft bedding, sending wisps of straw floating around her. But she tried again, her determination showing in every quivering muscle. "That's it, sweet girl," Emma encouraged softly, her hands hovering near but not touching, letting Willow find her own strength. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. Through the morning and into the afternoon, Willow's efforts continued. Each attempt lasted a little longer, her legs growing steadier by degrees. The sun tracked across the sky as they waited, hoping and believing. Finally, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the barn floor, Willow managed to stand. Her legs splayed awkwardly, but she was up, swaying like a newborn fawn finding its footing. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she watched the tiny foal take her first wobbling step, then another. "You're doing it, Willow," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. From the pasture, Luna had wandered closer to the barn, her hooves crunching softly in the gravel. She stretched her neck toward the warming pen, her soft muzzle reaching through the slats. A gentle nickering sound emerged from her throat, almost like a mother's encouragement to her smallest baby. The sound seemed to give Willow renewed confidence. That evening, the farmhouse was quiet, except for the gentle crackle of the fireplace. Emma sat in her favorite armchair, a worn leather journal open on her lap, while Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, methodically cleaning the day's bottles. The warm water sloshed quietly as he worked. The scratch of Emma's pen against paper filled the comfortable silence as she wrote, her hand trembling slightly with the day's lingering emotions. Today, she stood. It's a small step, but it feels like a huge leap forward. The words blurred slightly as another happy tear fell onto the page. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with a gentle breeze carrying the sweet scent of spring across the farm. Emma's hands trembled as she gathered fresh blankets and supplies, preparing for Willow's first venture outside. Daniel had already cleared a path from the barn to a sheltered spot in the pasture, making sure there were no obstacles that could trip the wobbly foal. "Ready?" Daniel asked, holding the barn door wide as Emma carefully lifted Willow into her arms. The tiny foal felt light as a feather, her gray coat soft against Emma's chest. Each step Emma took was measured and careful, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The morning dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds, and Willow's ears perked up at the new sights and sounds around her. Emma gently lowered her onto a dry patch of grass, keeping steady hands near the foal's sides for support. Willow's spindly legs quivered as she adjusted to the unfamiliar surface. Her hooves sank slightly into the soft earth, causing her to wobble uncertainly. Her siblings, noticing the newcomer, came bounding over, their powerful strides sending clumps of grass flying. They circled their tiny sister with unbridled enthusiasm, while Willow pressed closer to Emma's legs, overwhelmed by their energy.
As the morning progressed, Willow's confidence grew inch by inch. She took tentative steps away from Emma, her nose twitching as she investigated blades of grass and dandelions. Luna approached with careful steps, her motherly instincts drawing her to her smallest foal. She lowered her head, letting out a soft whinny as she gently nuzzled Willow's side. The tiny foal responded with a quiet nickering sound, leaning into her mother's touch. Daniel worked quietly nearby, hammering stakes into the ground to create a shaded area. He hung a tarp overhead and placed a shallow water bucket within easy reach. His eyes never strayed far from Willow as he worked, ready to help if needed. The sun climbed higher, warming the spring air. Willow's movements became more assured, and she even managed a few short trots, her little hooves lifting higher with each step. The effort soon tired her out, and she flopped down in the soft grass, her sides heaving with exertion, but her eyes bright with achievement. As the afternoon began to fade into evening, Emma noticed Willow's energy flagging. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. She scooped the tired foal into her arms, cradling her close. "You did so well today," she whispered, her voice swelling with pride. In the pasture behind them, the other foals galloped freely, their strong bodies moving with natural grace. But Emma's attention remained fixed on the precious bundle in her arms, knowing that Willow's small victories were just as meaningful as her siblings' effortless runs. The next morning brought a peaceful stillness to the barn, broken only by the gentle chirping of birds welcoming the day. Emma moved quietly through her morning routine, checking on Willow, who lay curled in her warming pen. The tiny foal's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, her gray coat catching the early light that filtered through the barn windows. Her small ears twitched occasionally,
responding to the familiar sounds of the barn coming to life. Daniel worked methodically at the other end of the barn, filling water buckets and spreading fresh hay for Luna and the other foals. The familiar sounds of his work created a comforting backdrop to their morning routine. The sweet scent of fresh hay mingled with the crisp morning air, creating that distinct farm atmosphere they'd grown to love. As the days progressed, Emma and Daniel fell into a natural rhythm caring for Willow. Emma handled the morning feedings, her gentle touch and soft voice becoming Willow's first experience of each new day. She'd spend extra time stroking the foal's neck, watching for signs of improvement in her strength and alertness. Daniel took the late-night shifts, his quiet determination matching the stillness of the midnight hours. He'd often bring his thermos of coffee, keeping silent vigil as Willow slept. "We should add some padding here," Daniel suggested one morning, pointing to the sides of Willow's pen. "It'll help her practice standing without risking a fall." Emma nodded, watching as he measured the space with careful eyes. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, already planning the best way to protect their precious charge. They gradually extended Willow's time outdoors, starting with short morning sessions and working up to longer afternoon stays. Each day, the tiny foal showed more interest in her surroundings, her ears perking up at new sounds, and her nose twitching at fresh scents. Her curiosity seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour, a promising sign of her developing spirit. That afternoon, Daniel set to work in the pasture, hammer in hand, and post balanced on his shoulder. He carefully marked out a space, driving stakes into the ground and securing sturdy fencing between them. The enclosure took shape under his skilled hands, large enough for Willow to explore but small enough to feel secure. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked through the warm afternoon, determined to finish before sunset. Inside the new space, Daniel added soft sand in one corner and a gentle slope of packed earth in another, creating different textures for Willow to experience. He installed a small shelter to protect her from the sun and positioned water within easy reach. Every detail was considered with Willow's needs in mind, from the height of the water bucket to the angle of the shelter's roof. As evening approached, they brought Willow to her new space. She stepped cautiously onto the soft ground, her delicate hooves testing each step. Emma leaned against the fence, watching as Willow explored her sanctuary. The tiny foal moved with growing confidence, investigating each corner of her personal kingdom. Her tail swished gently as she discovered each new texture beneath her feet. "She's finding her place," Emma said softly to Daniel, who stood beside her. He nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face as they watched their smallest charge discover her new world. The setting sun cast long shadows across the enclosure, painting everything in warm golden hues as Willow continued her careful exploration. The warm afternoon sun beat down on Emma's truck as she pulled into the feed store's gravel parking lot. The familiar bell chimed as she pushed open the door, her shopping list clutched in her hand. The store's wooden floors creaked beneath her feet as she made her way down the aisles, checking off items one by one. As she reached for a bag of supplements, voices drifted from the next aisle. "They're wasting time and money on that weak foal," a woman's voice said clearly. Emma's hand froze mid-reach, her stomach churning at the words. She recognized the voices, local farmers she'd known for years. Standing perfectly still, she listened as they continued their conversation about her family's foolish decision. Emma's cheeks burned, but she kept quiet, quickly gathering her remaining supplies. Her hands trembled slightly as she paid, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the store. The drive home felt longer than usual, the heavy weight of others' judgment sitting uncomfortably in her chest. Back at the farm, Daniel helped her unload the supplies, his strong arms making quick work of the heavy feed bags. Emma's voice wavered as she told him about the incident at the store. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his movements steady, clearly trying to hide his frustration for her sake. The crunch of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. Mr. Grayson's weathered truck pulled up beside the barn, and the old farmer stepped out, his boots kicking up dust as he approached. His eyes swept over the property before settling on Emma and Daniel. "Afternoon," he said gruffly, adjusting his worn cap. "Saw your little operation here with that weak foal." He gestured toward Willow's enclosure. "Might be worth considering selling those other two while they're still young. Focus your resources where they'll do more good." Emma's spine stiffened. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Grayson, but we're managing just fine." After Grayson left, his words hung heavy in the air. That evening, Daniel sat at their kitchen table, papers spread before him. "Emma," he said softly, "it's getting harder to keep up." His fingers traced over columns of numbers, worry lines creasing his forehead. Emma stood at the sink, her hands gripping the edge. "Willow's worth it," she replied, her voice firm, despite the uncertainty gnawing at her heart. As night settled over the farm, Emma sat in her favorite chair by the window, journal open in her lap. Daniel hunched over the desk nearby, calculator in hand as he reviewed their expenses. Through the open window they could hear the playful sounds of the foals in the pasture, their hooves drumming against the earth. "We're doing the right thing," Emma said quietly, though her voice carried a hint of doubt she couldn't quite hide. The full moon cast long shadows across the farmyard as Emma stirred in her sleep. A desperate, high-pitched neighing pierced the quiet night, jolting her fully awake. Her heart raced as she recognized Luna's distress call. "Daniel," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. "Something's wrong at the barn." Daniel bolted upright, instantly alert. They grabbed their winter coats and lanterns, their boots crunching against the gravel as they hurried across the yard. The moonlight illuminated their path, but shadows danced ominously around the barn's entrance. Inside, Luna paced her stall frantically, her hooves thundering against the wooden floor. Her eyes were wide with fear, ears pinned flat against her head. Emma's gaze immediately went to Willow's warming pen, and her stomach dropped. The pen lay on its side, blankets scattered across the floor, and Willow was huddled in the corner, her tiny body shaking. "Oh no," Emma breathed, moving toward the frightened foal. Daniel's lantern beam swept across the barn door, revealing deep scratch marks in the wood. "There!" Daniel pointed his light toward a dark shape scurrying through the barn door. "Raccoon. Must have gotten in somehow." Emma rushed to calm Luna while Daniel carefully approached Willow. He knelt beside the trembling foal, gently running his hands over her legs and body. Willow pressed against him, seeking comfort. "She's unharmed," Daniel announced, relief evident in his voice. He cradled Willow close, feeling her rapid heartbeat gradually slow. But this was too close. They worked together to right the warming pen, replacing the soiled blankets with fresh ones. Daniel examined the barn door more closely, noting where the raccoon had managed to squeeze through. "We need better security," he said, running his hand along the scratched wood. "Motion lights would help. Maybe some reinforced latches, too." Emma nodded, still shaken by what could have happened. "I'll call the hardware store first thing tomorrow," she agreed, watching as Daniel carefully settled Willow back into her pen. The night stretched on, and Emma couldn't bring herself to leave. She pulled up her usual stool beside Willow's pen, wrapping herself in a spare blanket. The barn felt different now, less safe, more vulnerable. She began to hum softly, an old lullaby her mother used to sing. Willow's ears twitched at the sound, and gradually the tiny foal's trembling subsided. Emma continued humming, her quiet melody mixing with the gentle sounds of the sleeping barn. Her determination to protect Willow burned stronger than ever, fueled by this night's close call. She kept her vigil through the dark hours, watching over her precious charge as the moon traced its path across the sky. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmyard as Daniel mounted the new motion-sensing lights above the barn door. The sound of his hammer echoed through the crisp air while Emma tended to Willow inside. The tiny foal showed remarkable resilience, displaying no signs of trauma from the previous night's scare. "Look at you, little one," Emma said softly as Willow pushed her nose against Emma's palm, seeking attention. The foal's eyes were bright and alert, her movements more purposeful than ever. "She's getting stronger," Emma called out to Daniel, who had paused his work to peek inside. Daniel smiled, watching Willow's determined attempts to follow Emma around the pen. "Those new latches should keep any unwanted visitors out," he said, returning to his task. As afternoon settled over the farm, Emma guided Willow toward her special enclosure. The small pasture, bordered by sturdy fencing, had become Willow's practice ground. Today, something was different. Instead of her usual hesitation, Willow stepped forward with newfound confidence, her delicate hooves pressing into the soft grass. Emma watched in amazement as Willow explored the space, her movements steady and deliberate. From the adjacent pasture, her siblings called out with excited whinnies, but Willow remained focused on her own journey. She paused occasionally to sniff at dandelions or inspect interesting patches of grass, but her steps never faltered. Daniel joined Emma at the fence, his work finished for the moment. They stood in comfortable silence, witnessing Willow's progress. Suddenly, the tiny foal gathered herself and broke into a short trot, her first real attempt at running. "She's doing it!" Emma exclaimed, tears welling up in her eyes. Her voice trembled with joy and pride. Daniel's expression softened as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "She's proving everyone wrong," he said quietly, watching Willow's triumphant moment. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft purples and oranges, Willow settled down in the grass. Her small body rose and fell with steady breaths, peaceful and content. Emma and Daniel sat nearby on an old wooden bench, sharing in the tranquil moment. Emma reached out to stroke Willow's silvery coat, her touch gentle and loving. "She's a fighter," she whispered, her voice full of pride and determination. Daniel nodded in agreement as Emma added, "And we'll keep fighting for her." The morning sun streamed through the barn windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden floor. Emma carefully measured the milk replacer powder, stirring it into warm water with practiced precision. The familiar sounds of hooves against grass and playful whinnies drifted in from outside, where Luna and the other foals enjoyed their morning exercise. From her pen, Willow nickered softly, her gentle sound making Emma smile. The tiny foal had learned to recognize the sound of bottles being prepared and now eagerly anticipated each feeding. Over the next few days, Emma noticed small but significant changes in Willow's development. The foal could maintain her standing position for longer periods, and her walking, though still wobbly, showed more stability. Emma kept a small notebook by Willow's pen, jotting down every milestone. Stood for 5 minutes straight. Walked entire length of enclosure without rest. Attempted to trot 3 times. During one afternoon outing in Willow's special enclosure, disaster struck. The tiny foal, perhaps feeling more confident than usual, stepped onto an uneven patch of ground. Her front leg twisted awkwardly as she lost her balance, and she tumbled to the grass with a frightened whimper. "Willow!" Emma rushed to the fallen foal, her heart pounding, Daniel, who had been mending a fence nearby, sprinted over to help. The small foal tried to stand, but immediately favored her right front leg, trembling slightly. The confidence that had been building in her eyes gave way to fear and confusion. Emma gently ran her hands over Willow's leg while Daniel called Dr. Miller. The veterinarian arrived as evening approached, her familiar truck kicking up dust along the driveway. She examined Willow's leg with gentle, experienced hands. "It's a sprain," she confirmed, carefully wrapping the leg in a supportive bandage. "She'll need to rest it, but with proper care, she can make a full recovery." Dr. Miller demonstrated the wrapping technique and explained their treatment plan. "Keep her movement limited for now. We'll gradually increase activity as she heals." Emma's worried eyes met Daniel's. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "She's come this far," he said. "This is just another hurdle to overcome." As night settled over the farm, Emma sat beside Willow's warming pen. The barn was quiet except for the occasional rustle of hay and soft animal sounds. She stroked Willow's silvery coat, feeling the foal's warmth beneath her hand. "You'll get through this," Emma whispered, though she couldn't completely hide the uncertainty in her voice. As she began to hum a quiet melody, Willow's eyes drifted closed, finding comfort in Emma's familiar presence despite her injury. The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting shadows across the scattered papers on the table. Daniel sat hunched over their farm ledger, his coffee growing cold beside him as he studied the numbers with growing concern. His forehead creased with worry lines as he ran calculations for the third time, his pencil tapping an anxious rhythm against the worn pages. Emma walked in carrying a steaming mug, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the kitchen. She paused, taking in Daniel's tense posture and the way his fingers gripped the pencil too tightly. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet seemed louder than usual in the heavy morning silence. "We're running low, aren't we?" she asked softly, settling into the chair beside him. The old wooden seat groaned under her weight, a sound that had become comforting over the years. Daniel nodded grimly, pushing the ledger toward her. "The supplements alone." He trailed off, rubbing his tired eyes. Dark circles beneath them betrayed his late nights spent worrying about their finances. Throughout the morning they pored over their finances, cups of coffee turning cold one after another. The mounting costs were undeniable. Specialized milk replacer, vitamin supplements, frequent vet visits, and the recent security upgrades to the barn. Each expense on its own seemed manageable, but together they painted a worrying picture that grew darker with each passing month. "Maybe we should consider selling the chestnut colt," Daniel suggested carefully, watching Emma's reaction. "He's strong, well-bred. He'd fetch a good price." His voice was gentle, understanding the weight of his words. Emma's hands tightened around her coffee mug, her knuckles turning white. She'd known this conversation was coming, but it still hurt to consider. "I know," she said quietly. "You're right. We need to be practical." Her throat felt tight as she spoke the words. That afternoon, Daniel grabbed his camera and headed to the pasture. The chestnut colt pranced around playfully, his coat gleaming in the sunshine, the picture of health and vitality. Each click of the camera felt heavy with meaning as Daniel captured photos for the sale listing. The young horse seemed to pose naturally, unaware that these pictures would help find him a new home. From the barn doorway, Emma watched the photo shoot, her chest tight with emotion. Beside her, Willow stood carefully, her bandaged leg held slightly off the ground. The tiny foal stayed close, following Emma's movements with complete trust in her eyes. Despite her injury, she remained alert and interested in everything around her, her ears pricking forward at every new sound. As evening approached, Emma and Daniel settled onto the front porch, the wooden chairs creaking softly beneath them. The sunset painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, while the foals grazed peacefully in the pasture below. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of fresh hay and summer flowers. "We'll do whatever it takes to give Willow a chance," Emma said firmly, her voice carrying both determination and a hint of the day's emotional toll. Her eyes never left the small figure of their special foal in the distance. Daniel reached over, placing his weathered hand over hers, and nodded in silent agreement. Together they watched the day's last light fade, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but facing them as one. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pasture as Mr. Grayson's weathered pickup truck rumbled up the dirt driveway, kicking up clouds of dust in its wake. He climbed out slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel as he made his way to the fence where Emma was watching the foals play in the late summer light. Willow tottered on her spindly legs, trying to keep pace with her stronger siblings as they frolicked in the field. Her bandaged leg had healed enough to allow light exercise, but her movements were still hesitant and unsteady, like a child learning to walk for the first time. "She's still struggling, huh?" Grayson remarked, shaking his head as he leaned against the wooden fence post, his calloused hands gripping the weathered wood. His weathered face creased with disapproval as he watched Willow stumble slightly on a small bump in the ground. Emma's spine stiffened at his tone, but she kept her eyes fixed on Willow, who had regained her balance and was determinedly moving forward, her tail swishing with each careful step. "You know," Grayson continued, pulling out a faded red handkerchief to wipe his brow in the late afternoon heat, "I've been thinking about those other two foals of yours. Fine specimens. I'd be willing to take them off your hands, give you a fair price too." He paused, gesturing toward Willow with a dismissive wave. "Let you focus your resources where they're needed, though I can't say I understand why you'd pour good money into a lost cause like that one." Emma's cheeks flushed with anger, but her voice remained steady as steel. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Grayson, but they're not for sale. None of them are. Not now, not ever." After Grayson's truck disappeared down the drive in a cloud of dust, Daniel joined Emma by the fence. The tension in her shoulders and the slight trembling of her hands told him everything he needed to know about the conversation. "You heard?" she asked quietly, her eyes still following Willow's determined steps. Daniel nodded, running a hand through his hair as the evening breeze rustled through the grass. "Some of what he said—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully, not wanting to add to her distress. "What if we're holding on to a dream that just isn't realistic?" Emma turned to face him, her eyes bright with conviction and fierce maternal protectiveness. "She's alive because of us, and she deserves the chance to keep fighting, every single day." That evening, Emma stood in the quiet barn, preparing Willow's bottle while crickets chirped their evening song outside. The familiar routine of measuring formula and testing the temperature against her wrist brought a sense of peace after the day's confrontation. Willow watched from her pen, nickering softly in anticipation, her gentle eyes following Emma's every move. As Emma held the bottle steady for Willow to drink, she stroked the foal's soft gray coat, feeling the warmth beneath her fingers. "You're worth every bit of this," she whispered, her voice full of tender determination as Willow's tail swished contentedly. "Every single bit." The morning of the local feed store's Farm Day event dawned bright and clear. Emma stood in the barn, brushing Willow's coat until it gleamed like polished silver in the early light. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the bandage on Willow's leg, doubt creeping into her thoughts. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," she murmured, stepping back to survey her work. "What if people just see her weaknesses?" Daniel walked up beside her, carrying their show halter. "She's a part of our family," he said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "Let them see her for who she is." At the feed store, colorful banners fluttered in the breeze as families gathered with their animals. Emma led Willow carefully from the trailer, her heart pounding as heads turned their way. The tiny foal's bandaged leg and diminutive size drew immediate attention. "Poor thing," Emma heard someone whisper. "So small for her age." But Willow held her head high, taking careful steps across the grass. A group of children approached, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Can we pet her?" a little girl asked, her voice full of wonder. Emma nodded, showing them how to hold their hands flat with carrots she'd brought. Willow's gentle nature shone through as she delicately took the treats, nickering softly at each child. Soon, a small crowd gathered around them, watching as Willow gracefully accepted their attention. An older woman with silver hair stepped forward, her eyes crinkling with warmth as she observed Willow. "She may be small," she said, reaching out to stroke Willow's neck, "but there's something special about her." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched more people gather around. Children took turns offering carrots while their parents asked questions about Willow's story. Daniel stood nearby, camera in hand, capturing the moment as Willow stood surrounded by admirers. Her ears perked forward with interest. "This one's going in a frame," he said, showing Emma the photo. "It'll look perfect in the barn." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the feed store's yard, Emma guided Willow back to their trailer. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, filled with pride at how well Willow had handled the day. "Today was a good day," she said to Daniel as he secured the trailer door. He nodded, watching Willow's small silhouette against the fading light. "She's proving herself, one step at a time." The farm was silent in the pre-dawn hours as Emma made her way to check on Willow. The pale light of early morning revealed Luna and the other foals already grazing peacefully in the pasture, their tails swishing lazily at the occasional fly. Willow remained close to the barn, her bandaged leg healing but still tender. She nickered softly when she saw Emma approaching, her ears pricking forward in recognition. "Good morning, sweet girl," Emma said, preparing the morning bottle with practiced movements. The familiar routine brought comfort to them both. Willow's eager anticipation, Emma's gentle encouragement, the quiet moments they shared as the world slowly awakened around them. A sudden rustling from the woods caught Emma's attention. She paused, bottle in hand, and peered into the shadows between the trees. Her heart skipped a beat as she spotted several dark shapes moving along the tree line. Stray dogs. Their lean bodies slunk through the tall grass at the edge of the pasture, heads low and predatory. Before Emma could move, one of the dogs let out a sharp bark that shattered the morning stillness. The effect was immediate. Luna's head shot up, her ears pinned back in alarm. The other foals scattered, their hooves thundering against the ground as they bolted across the pasture, their fear evident in every movement. "Daniel," Emma called out, her voice tight with fear. She heard the screen door slam and Daniel's heavy footsteps as he rushed outside, flashlight beam cutting through the dim morning light. His work boots pounded against the dirt as he ran toward them. The dogs growled, edging closer to the pasture, their hunger making them bold. Daniel shouted and charged toward them, swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The beam caught their eyes, making them glow eerily in the darkness. After a tense moment, the pack turned tail and disappeared back into the woods, leaving only trampled grass as evidence of their presence. In the chaos, Willow had stumbled, frightened by the commotion. Emma rushed to her side, hands trembling as she checked for new injuries. Though the tiny foal was shaken, her legs quivering beneath her, she appeared unharmed. Emma ran her hands along Willow's sides, murmuring words of comfort. "We need better fencing," Daniel said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He surveyed the old fence line, his jaw set with determination. His eyes traced the weathered posts and sagging wire, already forming plans for improvements. That evening, Emma sat beside Willow in the barn, running a soft brush over her silvery coat. The rhythmic strokes seemed to soothe them both after the morning scare, each pass of the brush releasing a little more tension. "We'll keep you safe," she promised quietly, watching as Willow's eyes grew heavy with sleep. The foal's long lashes fluttered as she fought to stay awake. Outside, Daniel worked by lantern light, hammering new posts into the ground and reinforcing the old fencing. The steady sound of his work echoed through the quiet night, a testament to their shared commitment to protecting their vulnerable charge. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he worked tirelessly, determined to finish before another dawn could bring new threats. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window. Emma stood silently, her coffee growing cold in her hands as she watched Daniel prepare the chestnut colt for viewing. Her stomach churned with a mix of guilt and necessity. The colt pranced around Daniel, his coat gleaming like polished copper in the morning light, blissfully unaware of the changes ahead. When the buyer's truck and trailer rumbled up the gravel driveway, Emma's grip tightened on her coffee cup. She recognized Mr. Peterson, a well-known horse trainer from the next county. His reputation for treating horses well offered a small comfort, but it didn't ease the ache in her heart. Daniel led Mr. Peterson to the paddock, where the chestnut colt showed off his natural grace and power. The colt's muscles rippled as he cantered along the fence line, his white blaze catching the sunlight. Mr. Peterson nodded approvingly, making notes on a small pad. "He's got good conformation," Mr. Peterson said, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. "Strong legs, excellent movement." Emma finally stepped outside, forcing herself to join them. The colt trotted over, pressing his velvet nose against her shoulder as if sensing her distress. She ran her hand along his neck one last time, memorizing the feel of his warm coat beneath her fingers. The paperwork was handled quickly. The check passed from hand to hand. Daniel helped guide the colt into the trailer, his movements gentle but efficient. The colt went willingly enough, though he whinnied once, the sound echoing across the farm like a farewell. As the trailer disappeared down the driveway, Emma and Daniel stood in silence. The empty space in the paddock seemed to grow larger with each passing moment. "It's the right thing to do," Daniel said softly, pulling Emma close. "This will help us keep Willow on the right track." Emma nodded against his shoulder, knowing he was right but unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The money from the sale would cover Willow's care for months to come, including her supplements and veterinary visits. That evening, the farm felt different. Luna and the speckled filly moved quietly through the pasture, their usual playfulness subdued. In her special enclosure, Willow hobbled to the fence where Emma stood. Her small gray head stretched up, nose touching Emma's palm, in a gentle gesture that brought tears to Emma's eyes. "We'll make it through this together," Emma whispered, stroking Willow's soft muzzle. The morning air was crisp and biting as Dr. Miller's white pickup truck pulled up to the weathered barn. Emma and Daniel stood waiting by the entrance, their faces etched with concern after the tumultuous events of the past few days. Inside the barn, Willow shifted restlessly in her warming pen, her bandaged leg showing signs of healing, but still requiring careful attention. The sweet scent of fresh hay mingled with the familiar earthy smell of the barn. "Good morning," Dr. Miller greeted them, her well-worn medical bag clutched firmly in hand. Her experienced eyes immediately went to Willow, assessing the foal's stance and alertness with the precision that came from decades of practice. Emma stepped forward, wringing her hands nervously. "She's been eating well, but we're worried about her leg. She seems to favor it more than usual." Dr. Miller nodded and began her examination, her movements gentle and practiced from years of handling fragile animals. She checked Willow's vital signs, ran her skilled hands along the tiny foal's frame, and paid special attention to the bandaged leg, carefully unwrapping it to inspect the healing progress. Willow stood quietly throughout the examination, seeming to understand the importance of staying still, only occasionally nickering softly. "She's improving," Dr. Miller announced, straightening up with a cautious smile. "But her immune system is still weak. You'll need to be extra cautious with her diet and exposure to other animals. Even a minor infection could set her back significantly." She reached into her bag and pulled out a detailed list. "I'm recommending these new supplements. They're expensive, but necessary for her development and building her strength." Daniel took the list, his expression tightening slightly at the prices, but he nodded without complaint. The recent sale of the chestnut colt made these expenses possible, though the reminder of their dwindling savings still stung. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. As Dr. Miller packed up her supplies, she paused, her face growing serious, lines of concern creasing her forehead. "I'll be honest with you both," she said, her voice gentle but firm, carrying the weight of experience. "Not every foal in her condition makes it this far. You've done an incredible job, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that she may not overcome every hurdle. The next few weeks will be crucial." The words hung heavy in the barn air, settling like dust motes in the streams of morning light. Emma's hand instinctively reached for Willow, who pressed her soft muzzle against Emma's palm, her whiskers tickling the skin. After Dr. Miller's truck disappeared down the gravel driveway, Emma and Daniel remained in the barn, sitting close together on hay bales near Willow's pen. The foal lay quietly on her fresh bedding, her bright eyes following their every movement, while the veterinarian's warning echoed in their minds, mixing with the soft sounds of the barn, the cooing of pigeons in the rafters, and the distant neighing of other horses. Daniel broke the silence, his voice steady and determined, carrying the quiet strength that had sustained them through countless challenges. "She's already beaten the odds this far. We'll keep going, no matter what it takes." Emma nodded, reaching over to grasp his calloused hand. Their shared resolve filled the space between them, stronger than any doubts or fears. Through the barn window, the morning sun cast long shadows across the floor, marking the beginning of another day in their journey with Willow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dewy grass as Emma led Willow toward her small enclosed pasture. The tiny foal's bandaged leg had healed enough for supervised exercise, and Emma watched carefully as Willow paused at the entrance, her ears twitching with uncertainty. After a moment's hesitation, Willow stepped forward, her movements more confident than before. Her hooves made soft impressions in the wet grass as she ventured further into the enclosure, her head held a bit higher than usual. In the adjacent pasture, her remaining sibling and Luna grazed peacefully. As Willow's presence caught their attention, the other foal trotted closer to the fence, nickering softly. For the first time, Willow responded by moving toward her sibling, her steps careful but purposeful. Emma's heart swelled as she watched Willow attempt to play. Though slower and more cautious than her sibling, Willow managed to trot alongside the fence line, matching her sister's movements. Luna kept a watchful eye on both foals, occasionally walking over to give Willow a gentle nudge when she fell behind. Daniel joined Emma at the fence, his work-worn hands resting on the weathered wood. A smile spread across his face as Willow stumbled slightly but quickly regained her balance, determined to keep up with her sibling's playful gallop. "She's not just surviving," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "She's learning how to live." Later that afternoon, Emma decided to test Willow's growing confidence. She created a small challenge, a shallow ditch lined with soft hay. Willow approached the obstacle with typical caution, her delicate frame tense with concentration. She studied the ditch, taking small steps forward and back, before finally gathering her courage. With wobbly but determined steps, she crossed the shallow trench, each hoof placement careful and deliberate. Emma and Daniel exchanged proud glances, their recent sacrifices feeling more worthwhile with each small victory. The sale of the chestnut colt, though still a fresh wound, seemed justified as they watched Willow grow stronger day by day. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Emma gathered Willow in her arms for the short journey back to the barn. The tiny foal's body felt warm and relaxed, her head resting trustingly against Emma's shoulder. The day's activities had tired her out, but her progress was undeniable. "You're stronger than you realize," Emma whispered, carefully placing Willow in her pen. Daniel set a fresh bottle by the warming lamp, preparing for the evening feeding, while Willow settled contentedly into her bed of clean straw. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Emma noticed something was wrong. Willow lay quietly in the corner of her pen, showing none of her usual enthusiasm for breakfast. The tiny foal's eyes, normally bright and alert, seemed dull and unfocused. Emma's heart sank as she reached out to touch Willow's forehead, feeling unusual warmth beneath her palm. Daniel entered the barn carrying fresh hay and immediately noticed Emma's worried expression. "Something's not right," Emma said, her voice tight with concern. "She won't get up for her morning feed." Without hesitation, Emma pulled out her phone and dialed Dr. Miller's number, her fingers trembling slightly as she explained Willow's symptoms. The vet promised to come right away, but the wait felt endless. When Dr. Miller arrived, she moved with practiced efficiency, examining Willow from head to toe. Her expression grew serious as she took the foal's temperature and listened to her breathing. "She's developed an infection," Dr. Miller finally announced, her voice grave. "Her immune system is still fragile, and this could become serious if untreated." The vet laid out a detailed treatment plan, demonstrating how to administer the medications and explaining the warning signs to watch for. Emma and Daniel listened intently, taking careful notes. They would need to monitor Willow's temperature every few hours and ensure she stayed hydrated. Over the next few days, Emma and Daniel barely slept, taking turns watching over Willow. The infection took its toll on the tiny foal's hard-won progress. Her legs, which had grown stronger in recent weeks, now trembled when she tried to stand. Each failed attempt to rise broke Emma's heart a little more. Daniel struggled to hide his own doubts as he watched Emma's exhaustion deepen. "Maybe we should have done more to prevent this," he said one evening, his voice heavy with guilt. Emma couldn't find the words to respond, her own fears threatening to overwhelm her. The medication seemed to help, but Willow's recovery was painfully slow. Each small setback felt magnified by their emotional investment in her survival. Emma spent countless hours sitting beside the pen, encouraging Willow to drink and monitoring her breathing. Late one night, as Emma sat cross-legged beside Willow's pen, her eyes heavy with fatigue, something changed. Willow, who had been lying still for hours, slowly raised her head. With what seemed like enormous effort, she stretched her neck toward Emma's hand and gave it a weak nuzzle. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she felt the gentle touch of Willow's soft muzzle. "You're still fighting," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "So will we." The news of Willow's illness spread quickly through their small farming community. What started as concerned whispers at the local feed store soon transformed into a wave of unexpected support. Emma was organizing Willow's medications one morning when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Sarah Miller, who owned the farm 2 properties over, stepped out of her truck carrying a large bag of premium feed. "I know it's not much," Sarah said, setting the bag down near the barn entrance, "but it's the good stuff, fortified with extra nutrients. Might help the little one bounce back." Throughout the day, more neighbors stopped by. Old Pete Thompson offered to fix the loose boards in the barn, insisting that Emma and Daniel needed to focus on Willow. His weathered hands made quick work of the repairs, while he shared stories of horses he'd helped raise over the decades. The afternoon brought the biggest surprise. Mr. Grayson's familiar pickup truck pulled into the driveway. He climbed out slowly, carrying a small bundle of premium hay. His usual gruff expression had softened, replaced by something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Thought the little one might like this," he said, avoiding direct eye contact. "It's the soft kind, easier to digest." He shuffled his feet, then added quietly, "I didn't think she'd make it, but I was wrong. She's got more fight in her than I've seen in any horse." Emma felt her throat tighten at his words. Daniel stepped forward to help Mr. Grayson with the hay, and the older man's shoulders relaxed visibly. The town's support seemed to breathe new life into their efforts. Emma and Daniel worked tirelessly, their determination bolstered by knowing they weren't alone. They took turns sitting with Willow, monitoring her temperature and coaxing her to eat small amounts of the special feed their neighbors had brought. As the sun began to set that evening, several neighbors gathered near the fence, speaking in hushed tones. Inside the pen, Willow stirred. Her legs trembled as she pushed against the ground. But this time, instead of falling back, she managed to rise. The tiny foal stood shakily, then took a few tentative steps forward. A collective gasp of joy came from the onlookers. Emma felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she squeezed Daniel's hand. "She's going to pull through," she whispered, watching Willow's careful movements with pride. The neighbors clapped softly, careful not to startle the foal. Even Mr. Grayson dabbed at his eyes with his sleeve, though he'd probably deny it later if anyone mentioned it. The county fairgrounds buzzed with activity on a bright spring morning. Trailers lined the parking area, and the air filled with excited chatter and the occasional whinny. Emma and Daniel stood beside their trailer, preparing Willow for her first competitive showcase. The tiny gray foal had grown stronger over the months, though she remained smaller than average. Her coat gleamed in the morning sun, freshly brushed and showing hints of dappled silver. Emma adjusted the leather halter one final time, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "Ready, girl," she whispered, stroking Willow's neck. The foal responded with a gentle nicker, pressing her nose against Emma's shoulder. The competition arena buzzed with spectators. As Emma led Willow through the entrance gate, a hush fell over the crowd. Many remembered the fragile newborn from previous farm events, and whispers of recognition rippled through the stands. Willow's hooves clicked steadily against the packed dirt as she followed Emma's lead. The judges sat straight-backed at their table, making notes as the pair began their demonstration. Willow moved with careful precision, showing how far she'd come from those first wobbly steps in the barn. Halfway through their routine, Willow's front hoof caught slightly, causing her to stumble. Emma's heart jumped, but before she could react, Willow had already recovered, regaining her balance with grace. One of the judges nodded approvingly, jotting something in his notebook. When all contestants had finished, the crowd waited anxiously for the results. The announcer called out placements, starting with 5th place. Willow didn't place in the top spots, but then the announcer's voice rang out again. "This year's special recognition award for most inspirational goes to Willow, owned by Emma and Daniel Jones." The crowd erupted in applause. Emma accepted the special ribbon with trembling hands, her eyes glistening. Daniel stood at the gate, beaming with pride as people around him clapped and cheered. Later, as they prepared to load Willow into the trailer, a small voice caught their attention. A little girl, no more than 7, stood clutching a worn notebook to her chest. "Can I draw a picture of her?" she asked shyly, looking up at Emma. Emma knelt down beside the girl, smiling warmly. "Of course. She loves being the center of attention." The evening sun cast shadows across the Jones family farm as they celebrated Willow's special recognition. Luna and her remaining foal grazed peacefully in the pasture, their tails swishing contentedly at the flies. Willow stood close to Emma, her once fragile frame now showing subtle muscle definition beneath her gleaming gray coat. Emma held out an apple slice, and Willow delicately picked it from her palm. The gentle gesture reminded Emma of those first uncertain days when they weren't sure if the tiny foal would survive. Now, Willow's eyes were bright and alert, her movements confident despite her small size. Daniel joined them in the pasture, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "Remember when she could barely stand?" he asked, handing Emma a glass. "Look at her now." Emma nodded, watching as Willow wandered a few steps away to nibble at the sweet grass. "She's changed our lives," she said softly. "She taught us what it means to believe in something, even when the odds are against you. And she's shown the community what's possible when you don't give up," Daniel added, his voice warm with pride. He paused, considering something. "You know, we could do more with her story. Help other families who might be struggling with similar situations." Emma's eyes lit up. "We could work with the local 4-H club, maybe even host open days at the farm." She watched as Willow trotted over to her sibling, matching the larger foal's pace with determination. "There are so many animals out there that just need someone to believe in them." They discussed possibilities as the sky turned golden. Local schools might be interested in field trips, and Dr. Miller had mentioned that Willow's story could help other farmers facing similar challenges. The ideas flowed naturally, each one building on their shared experience of nurturing Willow to health. As darkness approached, Emma and Daniel moved to the porch. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of hay and the peaceful sounds of the farm. Crickets chirping, horses shuffling, leaves rustling in the gentle wind. Willow had rejoined her family, grazing confidently alongside them in the dimming light. "This is only the beginning," Emma said softly, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders as they watched their horses in the field. Willow stood tall among them, her presence a living testament to resilience, love, and the power of never giving up. If you enjoyed the story of Luna and her foals, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.